Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural premiere episode of Bird and Goal, a new podcast that's part of the TCR family of podcasts. I'm introducing us just because you all probably came here, tuned into TCR, and if you aren't familiar with kind of what I've been doing lately, I've been trying to kind of help TCR become more of a family of content creators rather than just me, so that we can actually have content for you. My life has gotten so busy, it's hard for me to keep up with this. But hopefully, you know Jackie, and you're going to get to know Colby. So I'm going to introduce Jackie, and she's going to be the quarterback of this show. But I wanted to say hey and just sort of pass the baton. Jackie, why don't you introduce yourself, Colby, and tell everyone about Bird and Goal?
Hey everybody, what's going on? My name is Jackie. I have been featured on this channel before, but if you're new to me, welcome. This is going to be the Bird and Gold podcast with my co-host and with my boyfriend Colby. So we're very excited to bring you Cardinals content this coming football season. Y'all will catch us streaming on Wednesdays about this time. Just kind of quick recaps on the games, what we thought, just our perspective on everything going on Cardinals related. I look forward to each matchup every week. We're gonna try to keep the format a little bit short, half hour, 45 minutes. Don't want to take up too much time from you guys. With that being said, though, I will be putting up some chats, but just so everybody knows, I would like to interact with you as much as possible. But just to kind of keep the format a little bit shorter, if we don't get to you guys, I'm very sorry. But I'm going to go ahead and let Colby introduce himself.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on our first episode. Like Jackie said, we're very excited to start this pod and see how far we go. And it's an exciting year. I'm glad to be doing this and getting into, I filled in a couple times on Redbird Red Zone. And, I'm excited now to kind of have our own avenue and get to talk Cardinal football, which I think we all love to do.
Yep. So now we're here. The preseason has just wrapped up. 3 preseason games. Our 53-man roster has been released. So we're here just to kind of go over that, give our reactions on, who were surprised made the team, who were surprised got cut from the team, and then kind of look ahead a little bit into week one. I know we're a couple weeks out, but just a day closer to football, so that's really all we can be excited for. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and bring up the roster. So no surprises, of course. Kyler Murray, Jacoby Brissett will be your starting quarterbacks. We're bringing back James Conner, of course, Trey Benson, running back number 2. Amari DeMercado, which some people were kind of skeptical that we brought back. And then, of course, my biggest surprise was Bam Knight. What do you guys feel about Bam Knight making the team?
I liked what we saw out of the third preseason game, but it completely caught me almost, blindsided by him making the 53. Definitely a guy I thought might have beaten out Michael Carter for that practice squad spot. But, when Monty came in here, he gave DJ Dallas a big contract. And a lot of folks were upset that, we paid a lot of money for an RB4, not realizing that he was going to be our return man. And to see him get cut and in favor of Bam Knight as that RB4, I was surprised.
I was surprised at first, and then I thought about it a little bit more. And someone who I've had on TCR before, Blake Murphy, posted a tweet that I thought really made an interesting point, because you're looking at DJ Dallas, right, and then Michael Carter. And those are kind of the alternatives, really, who you're looking at, right? I think a lot of people thought if they were going to keep a fourth running back, it was going to be between those two. And when you're looking at JJ Dallas, you're looking at the guy who they brought in to be the special teams return man. He can run the ball a little bit, but he's much, more of an asset in special teams. Michael Carter, on the other hand, is more of an asset as a running back, less so as a special teams player. And he's got, that explosiveness, and we've seen the runs he made. But Bam Knight kind of does both, right? So he may not be at the same level as, Michael Carter as a running back, but he's closer than DJ Dallas is to that. And he may or may not be comparable to DJ Dallas, but he's closer to that than Michael Carter is. So it seems like maybe they made the choice that was to try to get the guy who can contribute both ways. And when you're looking at your fourth running back, maybe that versatility was more valuable. So if that's the thinking, makes sense to me.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is that there was a lot of discourse around Michael Carter not making the team, but I think people have to remember, and this was kind of the issue last year when he didn't make the team, was that he didn't want to do the grunt work. He didn't want to be blocking on third down. He didn't want to play special teams. He kind of valued himself higher than what the team did. And sometimes when you're kind of the odd man looking in, you kind of have to put the ego aside and kind of do what you're asked, and that's where Mercado comes in. And then you know coaches aren't dumb. They're not gonna make roster decisions based off of one flashy play the last game of preseason. They must have liked what they saw out of Bam to give him the nod. So I'm excited to see what Bam does. And I was very surprised that we did cut DJ Dallas, and I almost can't help but wonder. I was at the game Saturday against the Raiders, and he looked really stocky. He looked, so I wonder if kind of the physique was maybe a factor. That's just kind of my conspiracy theory. But yeah, that was my biggest surprise out of all the roster cuts that we made, that DJ Dallas was on the chopping block. But going into now, we have our wide receiver room, which there are some surprises here as well. With Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously, Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch, Zay Jones, Xavier Weaver. I know Semi Fehoko, he was kind of a preseason standout, so a lot of people were upset that he didn't make the roster as well.
Yeah, and you saw a lot in that last week before the Raider game of JG talking highly of Semi and what he did all preseason and how he liked the work. And then, we, as well as Semi, if you saw him on his TikTok and now on his Twitter, we were all surprised that that he got cut. That was one of the guys that I missed on. I thought that he filled that Zach Pascal role as a end of the wide receiver room special teams guy, and I thought it was like a shoe-in. Obviously, they signed him back to the practice squad, so we'll see if he gets pulled up or elevated. But yeah, it was interesting to see Weaver kind of take that fifth wide receiver spot. I thought it was kind of a push, and we're not in those rooms, but they went with the draft pick.
I wasn't as surprised, and it wasn't because of the performance. Really, and this was something we talked about in the TCR Discord a little bit. There was some chat on this. When you look at the decisions for who's going to be on the roster, it's not always as directly the best player or performance as you might think. There are other considerations. To start with, and I know we were talking about this before the show, there's a lot that goes on in practice that we don't see that coaches do see. So the game is not, that's what we see. So that is heavily weighted in our views, but it's not everything. And then obviously games, sometimes they're vanilla defenses, third stringer, second. The conditions kind of don't make it always the best point of evaluation. But another consideration, or another set of considerations that go in these decisions, has to do with one, positional scarcity, right? In terms of some positions, it's just harder to find. So like you might have a player one position who doesn't perform as well, but because it's a harder position to find, you're going to keep that guy, because if you try to release him and get him through waivers to the practice squad, someone else is going to snatch him up, even if he didn't light the world on fire, because that's a position you're going to take and keep on your roster to develop. But also, even within a position group like receiver here, like a guy who is like his first or second year in the league versus a guy who's like his fourth or fifth year in the league, like you have to understand that like when you release a guy like Simi, like another team, for them to claim him, they have to decide they want him on their active roster. And as nice as he looked, this is a journeyman, who's been around the league for a few years, who hasn't established himself as a firm roster guy. He's been sort of a bubble guy. He looked nice. But like another team that's rounding out the receiver room just like we are is less likely to look at him and say, we need to grab him on our active roster. If they can get him on the practice squad, they might. but they're less likely to do that. Whereas Xavier Weaver, I know people might think, well, he hasn't done as much, but he was, coming out of college, he was, one of those undrafted free agents that was kind of one of the better, more highly touted undrafted free agents. I think he's younger, so I think there's maybe more of a view of him as having an upside. So, I think there may have been a situation where they looked at and they thought between Xavier Weaver and Simi Fehoko, Fajoko's the guy who we're more likely to get through waivers and get on the practice squad, and as we'll talk about in a little bit, ends up being exactly the case. So you just have to remember, and the same goes for a guy we're going to talk about in the cornerback room. Sometimes you might have two players and one outperformed him, but the situation and the age or the positional learning curve, it makes it to where just the logistics of the likelihood of getting him on your practice squad is the difference maker in the decision.
Right. Especially with those guys that are, that 50 to 53, those last 6 guys on your 53-man roster.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. And then now we're moving on to our tight end room, Trey McBride, Tip Ryman, Elijah Higgins. I was going to say Elijah Jones, sorry. And then Travis, help me out with this last name, Vokalek.
I think that's right. Sounds good to me.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Yep. So 4 tight ends coming into the season. The tight ends are kind of the bread and butter on our offense. So no surprises there other than, Travis Vokalek is not a household name, but, just a good depth piece because, we do like to run our 13 personnel. So, we got to have another warm body and, just in case disaster strikes.
Yeah, and that was a guy, too, who was on, he dressed for all 17 games last year, if I don't recall. He's not playing into the offense. He's not playing a major role in the offense. But like you said, we run a lot of 12 and 13 personnel where we are going to see Elijah Higgins and Tip and Trey all on the field at the same time. And if something does happen, you do have Travis there. And that's all I have there. I thought maybe looking at the numbers when I was doing my 53, I thought they might opt for 3 tight ends and to try to, squeeze Volek onto the practice squad. But they opted for 4 again like last season. And yeah, just more to add to that.
And if you look at the composition of this tight end room, right, you have Trey McBride, who is just obviously a stud and who is good at both receiving and blocking. But then you have Tip Ryman, who is the blocking tight end, right? He has some physicality, and we'd like to see him develop as a receiver. But what he really brings to the table is blocking. And then Elijah Higgins is more the receiving tight end. And when I look at this, to me, Vokalek is sort of that backup blocking tight end, right? He's the backup for Tip Ryman in a sense. And obviously they kept him on the roster, which says they probably didn't think they could get him to the practice squad or bring him back that way. And with the kind of personnel they're going to run, as you both mentioned, tight end is going to be very important. So, when you look at it, it's one of those things where I might not have anticipated that on the front end, but when you look at it after the fact, it makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense. Up next, we have our offensive line room. So we have Paris Johnson Jr., Jonah Williams, Yel DeFroholt, Will Hernandez, Isaiah Adams, Evan Brown, Kelvin Beachum, John Gaines II, and then Josh Fryer, who is, correct me if I'm wrong, undrafted free agent?
Yeah, out of Ohio State.
Yep.
Yeah. So Colby brought up something interesting because I did not get to watch the Denver game. But he said that during that Denver game, he was pulled. And so I kind of was like, oh, was he not playing well? And he's like, well, typically what that means is you're probably going to make the team.
Yeah, and he did make the 53-man roster. This is a guy who was at Ohio State. Monty Austin-Ford has gone to that well a couple times now, and the offensive line coach is here. So he's familiar with the concept. He's familiar with the language, and it's kind of like having the answers to the test. And he before it, and he passed. You notice Jackie's voice there when she said Will Hernandez? Jackie's very excited. Will Hernandez is back on this 53-man
Very
roster.
excited.
I mean, listen, I've got a crush on Will Hernandez too, so I
everybody does.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's a great guy, and a great football player. And I'm not sure how healthy he is right now, so I'm not sure what's going to go because like the numbers right now, we are carrying 54 people on our 53-man roster at this moment. And if you look at the special teams line right there, we do not have a long snapper. And they did not put Aaron Brewer back on the practice squad yet at this time. I know he is a veteran, so he's kind of, exempt from it, and we can do some cool cap stuff and roster stuff with him. But we do have one more person than we're supposed to at this point.
Yeah, when you look at the offensive line, Fryer was interesting. To have an undrafted free agent make the team is that's impressive to have done that. When preseason game performance, as we talked about, is not always the best predictor, but for what it's worth, his PFF grades, in the preseason, he had the 5th best pass blocking grade of any Cardinals player in the preseason. And if you take out running back, he had the 4th best, right? Pass blocking. His running blocking grade wasn't, quite as high. But his pass blocking grade in the preseason was 80.9. His run blocking was 61.1, and his overall offense grade was 66.7. Again, you have to take that with a grain of salt preseason. But for an offense or undrafted free agent, he performed well. And Colby, you mentioned, Aaron Brewer, and they seem to do this every year with him. Is he doesn't make the roster, but they have a gentleman's agreement, right? It's just understood, and he gets it, and he's been here forever. I'm guessing he has a home and he's settled and he doesn't want to go anywhere. And they just say, hey, listen, let us get through the initial kind of dust settling of the roster when this gives us one more player we can keep and not have to worry about him being subjected to waivers. And then then we're going to see there's going to be a move, and they're going to release a player who they will probably try to get back on the practice squad and make room for him before the season starts. Or maybe they'll put him on the practice squad and elevate, but they'll work something out, right? There's a plan, and he knows what it is, right?
Right. Yeah, hopefully we don't go into the season without our long snapper.
Yeah.
Let me ask you about the question. And Silver Wolf AZ is asking top 5 offensive line. That might be a little more optimistic than I am, but how do you all feel about this offensive line?
If you ask me this based off of the first 8 games that this line played, I would say absolutely. But we did sputter after our bye week last week, and which was really interesting. Is it was when Jonah Williams came back that nothing seemed to really gel, and we Kelvin Beachum was kind of out of the starting lineup. So if they hold like they should hold, like they did hold in the first few games of last season, I would say so, but you never know. And then just, fingers crossed, bearing injury, that we don't have to see too many of our backups.
Yeah, I think this is an extremely talented unit. They were successful last year. Not a top 5 offensive line, but they were in the top half, top third of the league last season until the injury bug hit, and it hit this group hard. You lost Jonah Williams. Evan Brown was hurt for a game or two. Will Hernandez got hurt. Paris got hurt. We rolled out a bunch of different combinations of this line, but when this line is healthy, left to right, there's not really any sort of concern. There is the question mark with Isaiah Adams, so you're not really sure what that position is going to look like or how well he'll do. But maybe that is why they brought back Will Hernandez. Maybe Isaiah is on a short leash, and they won't hesitate to throw Will back in if he's healthy.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it too. I know I've talked about a lot in my my live streams in the past how offensive line is a weak link position where you don't have to have a star studded offensive line. What you need to have is an offensive line where there's everyone's at least competent, decent or better, and you just don't want to have that one or two weak links. And I feel like unless they have multiple injuries, I think they can even survive one injury at least on the interior because they've got Hernandez, Adams, Brown, right, and Froholt. So as long as they don't lose 2 of those guys, I feel pretty comfortable. Like I know Isaiah Adams maybe had a little bit of rough go at points, but he was a rookie and actually was better at run blocking, pass blocking, but didn't grade terribly bad for a rookie, right? And I think they drafted him for a reason. And there's Paris Johnson Jr. is the only true, I think, stud on this offensive line, and Froholt is developing into a really good center. But I feel like it's solid across the board. Beecham is a solid backup. We'll see what Gaines gives, but hopefully, we haven't seen much of him, but as their backup center, hopefully, he's developed. So, and then they've got some guys that we'll see on the pup list that are also some depth on that, right? So it's if they have a couple injuries, I might be worried, but as it stands, I feel pretty comfortable with what it looks like from my perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. And speaking of the pup list, now we're on to our defensive line. Um, so we're rolling in now with Dalvin Tomlinson, Calais Campbell, Darius Robinson, Dante Stills, Justin Jones, LJ Collier, and a surprise to me was PJ Mustipher. I didn't get to watch too much of preseason, so nothing really popped out for me as far as he goes. But on the pup, we have Walter Nolan, who is our first round draft pick this year, as well as BJ Ojolari and Bilal Nichols. So I'm curious to see where they all fit in what I feel is a very stacked defensive line room when it comes time to activate them.
Yeah, I do not envy Monty Austin for these decisions he's going to have to make in the front seven when they are all healthy and ready to be activated. There are good players that we cut. There are good players on this roster right now that are going to have to be cut, and I don't know where he's going to go. I was surprised to see they kept 7 defensive linemen. I thought one of LJ Collier or PJ were going to make the team. I did not think both were going to make the 53. But after watching the Kansas City game, PJ was on a tear. That defensive line, that second unit that ran out there, I think it was Xavier Thomas, Jordan Birch, PJ Mustipher, and Dante Stills? No, Dante Stills was not playing. It must have been LJ Collier. Those 4 guys for a drive were just game wreckers. 2.5 drives. They were making it a rough day for the Kansas City offense. And between Gardner Minshew got pulled pretty early after that defensive line. I think it was that series that Jordan Birch had, the pass breakup and the sack and another pressure, and I'm like, this is not fair. These guys are all over the place. So I was very high on PJ Mustipher. I had him on the 53. I'm happy to see him make it, and I'm excited to see the defensive line in live game. Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais kind of got the vet treatment, and they didn't suit up at one point in the preseason. And I know the fans love Calais, so we're all excited for this defense.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have been talking about, not even just Cardinals fans, people outside of the Cardinals kind of orbit have talked about how this defensive line went from being the weakest unit on the team to arguably the strongest. And maybe it's the second strongest if you consider the safety room, but it's a strength now. When you've got, I love Dalvin Tomlinson as a signing. He is everyone's talking about Calais Campbell as well. They should, but Dalvin Tomlinson as a nose tackle is just really, really, really good. And then Darius Robinson, obviously had some injuries last year, so it's going to be interesting to see what he does. And when Dante Stills was arguably our best defensive lineman, last year, the year before, and now he gets to probably slide into a better role for him, which is part of a rotation, right? You love that. With Mustipher, he's a nose tackle kind of a guy, right? And when a couple guys get healthy, when Nichols maybe comes off the pup, potentially, or when they start shuffling the roster, it wouldn't shock me if Mustipher ends up on the practice squad. We'll see. But you're going to keep a nose tackle guy in there, for depth there. So, but yeah, and then obviously, when Walter Nolan comes back, hopefully, that's going to be infuse some energy to this line.
Yeah, and I know people are really disappointed that we won't see Walter Nolan for the first 4 weeks. Um, but it's kind of a good thing that he's not in a position when he can return to save the team, so to say. It wasn't like last year when we lost Darius, and it's like, well, now we're in a really crappy situation. So we're not a Walter Nolan away from still being a good team.
Right. Yeah. You saw that last year, when, like you said, when D-Rob went down, it was, at that point, it was a rookie 5th-round pick in Dante Stills and Roy Lopez. And,
Mm.
you had Justin Jones and Bilal get hurt, and then it just became, just Roy Lopez and
Yeah.
Dante Stills, and now we have this abundance to. Yeah, you don't have Walter off the jump, but look at the names on that list. Like I almost don't even know where Walter would have gotten playing time. He would have gotten plenty of playing time, but it's another piece into this puzzle of the defensive line that JG and Nick Rallis have to be salivating at every week when they get to go into game planning, because these guys are like, Dalvin Tomlinson's a game wrecker. He's a big space eater in the middle of that defensive line, and Darius Robinson and these outside linebackers, they're going to get to benefit from the pressure that Dalvin Tomlinson and Calais are going to be generating.
And the cornerback room is going to benefit too, right? I mean, we that connection between pass rush and coverage, right? They're not having to, be out there on an island as long as well.
Yeah, and you saw that, this roster is getting built exactly like those Eagles teams that JG was a part of, and it's a front seven that can get after the quarterback and is going to be top 3 or 5 in the league in sacks. And you're going to ask these corners, while young, maybe a little unproven, you're not asking them to cover for 6.5 seconds.
Mhm.
The defensive line is going to get there in time and hold up, and that was the one weakness of that Eagle team that JG was a part of. The secondary was not lockdown corners. They weren't the scariest secondary. They weren't the Legion of Boom. They weren't anything to write home about. But the front seven was so dominant that it covered a lot of the shortcomings, and it's going to help these guys here, like you said.
And another strong position group too that I'm looking at after their defensive line is our outside linebackers with the new addition of Josh Sweat. But we've got Josh Sweat, Zaven Collins, Baron Browning, Jordan Burge, and Xavier Thomas, who I felt Xavier Thomas played really well against the Raiders last week. And Jordan Burge has really stood out. And we talk about Will Johnson potentially being the steal draft, but if he comes out the gate a little slow and Jordan Burge is looking like what I think Jordan Burge should be looking like, I think that might be the steal of our draft.
Yeah, this was a guy that, on day 2 of the draft, people were upset that we took another pass rusher. They wanted the wide receiver, they wanted someone to catch the ball, but the offense isn't built to support 3 wide receivers. We're going to run 3 tight ends more than we're going to run 3 wide receivers. So getting a Jordan Burch, and then I think the amount of national attention after the Raider game that Jordan Burch has been getting has been impressive to see too. And I think he's going to when he gets more reps and more snaps, I think he is going to prove everybody they'll be eating their words after complaining about not taking a wide receiver in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I agree with you, Colby. In terms of and I've said this a lot, kind of anytime I've been on a podcast live stream, that this offense is built more for running and tight ends, and it's not built to have to build a wide receiver room like you have in Miami or something. I mean, yet would you like more good wide receivers? Sure, but your pass catchers are McBride primarily, and then Marvin Harrison Jr. as he develops, and then you need complementary guys. They're going to be more of a defensive, kind of team. So I didn't, and I still don't have an issue with them not taking, a wide receiver in the draft. I think their wide receiver room for what they're going to do is appropriate, and it's going to grow and develop. And this edge rushing group is intriguing. It's still, Josh Sweat is the only really proven guy. Zaven, he's a good player, but he's kind of this interesting conversion to edge. Baron Browning is an upside potential who, kind of player who obviously they brought back for a reason, but he's a guy who's had some injury issues and hasn't quite reached his ceiling. Excited about what I saw about Jordan Burch. I had a feeling they were going to draft an edge rusher. That's not who I had in my radar, but they know what they're looking for, and he's looked good in the preseason, so I'm excited about that. And Xavier Thomas is intriguing, right? A guy who had a kind of a difficult path to pros, and he was a 5th round pick. But, it's well documented on my live streams that I'm a fan of the way the Baltimore Ravens do edge rusher. They draft guys like Xavier Thomas in the middle rounds, and then they develop them. And edge rushers might take a little time, but then they become productive players. So I'm intrigued to see, and he showed flashes in the preseason. Does Xavier Thomas take that step and become a better edge rusher? And then obviously, as we'll talk about in a bit, BJ Ojulari's, a guy who could be coming back at some point. So there's a lot of upside and more talent in this edge room than there has been under in years, really. since Chandler Jones left, really.
Oh my god, it's a name I haven't heard in
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
But moving on into a position group that I am a little concerned about, I'm not gonna lie, it's our inside linebackers. We're rolling with Mac Wilson Sr., who I love, you know, Akeem Davis Gaither, Owen Papo, and Cody Simon. Um, Owen Papo was kind of like an outside looking in kind of guy. It was between him and Michael Walker. Um, Both I feel were kind of in the same boat a little bit. You can either go either or with either guy, but Owen Papo has been with the regime longer. They like to develop their guys, so I'm sure that's why they gave him the nod.
Yeah, and it comes down to, what you do on special teams and what you're doing in those meeting rooms every day, and maybe having the, what Joe has mentioned before. I don't think he would have gotten through waivers. I think there's enough people around the league who saw Owen's testing, and he's just a freak athlete, and raw guy that needs some time to develop. And I think a team would have absolutely pounced on that opportunity had he hit the wave. Had he been released by the Cardinals.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are worried about the linebacker room and have commented on that. I've seen not just Cardinals fans, I've seen here and there podcasters. And right now, like I'm just scanning through the different rosters, start and looking at their PFF grades for inside linebackers, and what I'm seeing, just kind of skimming through this, is what I suspect I would see. Most teams have middle linebacker groups that don't have highly graded players. There's a few, but at least 2/3 of the teams out there are starting inside linebackers with PFF grades that are comparable to Wilson, Keem Davis Gaither, 50s and 60s grades. And then there's a handful of teams that have better. And I was listening to a podcast. I want to say it was The Athletic, but I could be wrong. Their football podcast. But someone was talking about linebacker rooms, and that this, like, the way kind of middle linebacker, like, teams don't put a lot of resources in that typically, and guys you draft often don't necessarily come out right off the bat and be great. And that a lot of the way teams often put together their middle linebacker rooms is they bring in guys, they find veterans who are in their fourth or fifth year, because that's kind of when they really start to hit their stride. Can't talk. And then, but they don't put tons of resources in because it isn't one of those premium positions. And so Mac Wilson Jr. or Senior played well. Akeem Davis Gaither's a guy who's in that fourth, or he's in that point in his career where linebackers start to develop. He's been a guy, with the Bengals who wasn't a starter, but he's athletic. So he's a guy like, okay, you take your chance on him. He's a veteran. He has played a bit, and maybe he kind of hits that stride as a solid starter. Papo's that athletic freak that they drafted, who has flashed here and there, and then Simon is, obviously the rookie. So, like, I'm not worried about this linebacker room because I actually think it looks like what a lot of linebacker rooms around the NFL probably. I think at least half, if not 2/3 of the linebacker rooms around the NFL are in no better of a state than the Cardinals. And it's just not a position group that you see a lot of elite rooms in. So I am not really worried about it, and I think it's fine.
Yeah, there's a long list. Like you said, it's that 4 or 5 year before, after that first contract, that these teams, then the next team almost benefits better from it. We saw that with Devondre Campbell, and we saw that with that, when Carlos Dansby left here and went to Cleveland, and then he came back, and, Chris Barnes, and you get these inside, Kaiser White, you get these inside linebackers that come from another place, and that's when you kind of see them shine. And then in 2 years, they move on and kind of disappear. Like Devondre Campbell went to San Fran and got hurt, and we've never really heard from him again. And
He gave the middle finger to the org and left.
Yeah. And so I think, like you said, it's a raw group and kind of questionable. But I liked what I saw out of Cody, out of the rookie. And I think just his pedigree, being a guy that, won, defensive player of the game in the semifinal, and was, the player of the game for the national championship. This is a guy who has all the tools, and it's just going to take him getting used to the NFL game. And I think they have something special there with Cody Simon.
So Brian Abdallah in the chat, hey Brian, hope you're doing well. Ask, he's work. Or I just get nervous when if Mac gets hurt. Who plays? Who wears the green dot? What do y'all think about that? If who do you think wears the green dot? If it isn't, if Wilson goes down.
Yeah, that'll be your welcome to the league moment because Cody Simon's going to have the green dot, and he's going to get thrown right into the fire because there's not another guy there, and maybe that's when they'll look to go get Kaiser White. If he's still out there, maybe you give him a call to come in if they don't think Cody's ready. But I would fully expect Cody Simon to get the green dot. He wore the green dot in practice as well as in the game as soon as Mac was gone, and that would be my guy.
Yeah, he wore it in college too, so.
Okay.
That I guess that's why you draft him for that reason. And I was pretty high on him coming, once I learned everything about the players coming out of the draft and seeing his pedigree and all that, I was pretty high on him. And I trust that we have the right coaching staff to develop him to be a guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that'll be a little scary if that situation were to come up.
I'm not as worried about it because I could also see Akeem Davis Gaither have it, and he's in his fifth year, 6th year, I guess. He was a rookie in 2020, and so he is a veteran. Or listen, Buddha with the green dot is always an option too. But if Simon, he seems like he's a smart player, like you said, he wore the green dot. And Lorenzo saying chat even Zaven in an emergency situation. So I think they'll be fine in that situation. If Cody Simon has it, it's going to be because they trust him with it. And if they don't feel comfortable with that, they've got other options. It doesn't have to be the Mike linebacker.
Yeah. I didn't even think of Buddha, but that would be very interesting. Obviously, I would have to take way too much time to go check, but I think he might be the only safety that would wear the green dot. That's so unique.
Well, but
Zaven,
they move him around, right? He's in the box sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So.
True, yeah. And I forget they did have Zaven wear the green dot a couple years ago during training camp as they were kind of looking to move him to inside linebacker if he couldn't make it as a pass rusher. So he's done it before also.
Yeah, that would be extremely interesting. Speaking of welcome to the NFL, now we have our cornerback room, which is a pretty young room going into the season. A very talented room, don't get me wrong. We have Garrett Williams, Max Melton, Will Johnson, Elijah Jones, Keichel Clark, and Denzel Burke. Johnson, of course, was our second round draft pick that might end up being the steal of a century if all goes according to plan. And then Denzel Burke, that I felt like we kind of doubled up on. But this is going to be an interesting group to watch because no Sean Murphy Bunting, no Starling Thomas. So it's going to be baptism by fire with these guys, but I'm very excited. No surprises on who made the cut, but glad to see them stick with Keichel Clark. I felt like he had a really good preseason, especially against the Raiders.
Yeah, and then you just look at the full room right now. You've got a couple of 2023 picks, and you've got a couple of 2024 picks, and then it's 3 kids, or it's not 3. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm looking at Crawford already, but you got 2 guys who are rookies this year. So collectively the 6 corners have what 6 years, 7, 8, 9 years of service in the league right now. It's not very experienced, but it is certainly very talented.
I really like this room. I know there's some people who aren't following it, who closely, who don't follow the Cardinals closely, who are worried because there's, not as many, kind of household names, so to speak, and it's young. Real quick, I want to thank Classy Nasty for jumping on, becoming a channel member. Thanks. Appreciate you, my friend. So like Garrett Williams is already a stud in my view. Like, right. He was like the 4th highest graded cornerback or something like that. He was top 5. He was, he was their slot guy, just has really owned that position. He might play more outside this year, but just love him. He's people who don't follow Cardinals may not know how good he is, but he is a stud. We obviously we talk about Will Johnson, just what potential he has. Max Melton, second round pick, athletic, had his ups and downs, but going into the second year isn't going to have to be the number one cornerback, which I think is really important. Keitrell Clark, inside outside versatility. He's got some snaps under his belt in the NFL, right? Maybe he hasn't been grabbed hold of the starting job, but he saw it. And then, there's Denzel Burke was a guy that they liked. He fits the scheme really well. And then Elijah Jones was a third round pick for a reason. Obviously, he got injured. We haven't seen anything, but he's he could surprise people, or maybe he won't. But like there's talent there, and there's a reason they kept him around again this year. So, I've kind of, when I think about this cornerback room over the last year or two, I've sometimes thought about it like the Hunger Games, like someone's going to emerge, like, whoever survives, like they've drafted so many players over the last couple of years, right? That, and they kept 6, which usually you only keep 4 or 5, but there's a reason they did. So like, I don't know, besides Garrett Williams, who's going to emerge, because obviously you've got Starling Thomas in the picture whenever he comes back, assuming, I hope, I imagine that I can bring him back when he's healthy again. So you don't know who's going to be the top 3 cornerbacks aside from Garrett Williams. We have suspicions now that it's Johnson and Melton, but if like Melton doesn't pan out, someone's going to emerge and be part of that depth and is going to play well, whether it's Jones or Clark. So, I like the potential and I like the athleticism, and I don't know, I'm kind of excited about this room.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this room.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. Of course, all eyes, week 1's going to be on Will Johnson, who had a couple of lost in the sauce moments during preseason, but corner is, in my opinion, the hardest position to play, especially when you're transitioning from college to the NFL. So that's going to be real interesting to watch. And then the final position group that we have is our safeties. So no-brainer, Buda Baker, Jalen Thompson, Rabbit, Taylor Demerson, Joey Blunt, who's been a savant on special teams. And I was actually a little surprised that we kept Keaton Crawford. I thought he would be a more of a practice squad kind of type of guy. But, he does have some special teams value.
Yeah, and it was a numbers thing as well. Often they keep 10 DBs, and if you keep 6 corners, I thought they would keep 4 safeties. So I was surprised to see. I thought Crawford would just numbers be the odd guy out, because they speak very highly of Joey Blount and his special teams play. So it was exciting to see Crawford make the 53, and with obviously the 2 guys are on the PUP or right now not active, but all 7 guys that they drafted are on this team. No one got cut.
Yeah, and when I look at like Keaton Crawford, like I think this is one of those guys that made the team. He's going to be a special teams demon. He's athletic as all get out. There's the reason he ended up, it was at Reno or Nevada where he was at, there was a reason, and it wasn't because he wasn't. There was kind of a little bit of a path he had to deal with some stuff, right? But he was originally, was it Texas where he was originally? He was originally in a major program. So this is a guy who had the athleticism and skills to be recruited to a major program and then ended up where he was. But he's the kind of guy you draft to develop into a special teams demon who you hope might even become more than that. And he's also, I forget where it was I heard, but he's one of those picks that like when the team took him, other GMs were like, oh, dang it. Like, because people knew, right? People liked him for the upside. So I think he was a guy they knew they weren't going to be able to get through the practice squad. They were not, I don't think he was going to clear waivers. So I wasn't as surprised about that. And Joey Blount's been a really good special teams performer. Really good room, obviously, right? And we all know we love Rabbit and what he means is the future of the safety room. So, it makes sense to me. There was a question that I think Lorenzo asked: what QB would you like to see on the practice squad? Because with Tune gone, right? That's an interesting question, and maybe we can address that when we get to the practice squad. But I'd like to kind of get that question out in the ether for us.
Yeah, if you want to throw up the practice squad list, As far as I always like Tyler Huntley. Unfortunately, I believe that he is with Baltimore again. That would have been my pick. It's slim pickings now. I know me and Colby talked about don't know the kid's name, but whoever came backed up Bailey was it after Bailey Zappi played in Kansas City, whoever's playing after?
Yeah, the kid they have from South Dakota State, Chris. I'm gonna say it wrong. I'm gonna butcher it real bad. The Oladokun. He came in and looked in the plays that they were running and scheming for him that week one. I was like, this looks like what they asked Kyler to do. Like, this is a guy who's rolling out of the pocket. He has a big arm, and it looked effortless. Um, Obviously, he got released and signed back to the Chiefs practice squad, so you'd have to sign him off of the Chiefs practice squad and put him right on the 53, which I don't think Monty's going to do. We already have too many questions and musical chairs of when guys are going to come off the IR and the pup, and unfortunately, I really do not know what they're going to do with a third quarterback or if they carry one. Jacoby can run the practice squad, so it's not like you need a guy to run it weekly. But if something happens to one, I'm not sure where they will go.
The name Brian mentioned the name that I was thinking of, and my buddy Aaron Van Buren, who you all know, right? He tweeted about this. DTR, right? Was cut by the Eagles. Dorian Thompson Robinson. Now he hasn't played well in the regular season as a pro. He struggled, but that is a really interesting player who has a skill set that I think fits kind of what they do. So that's the player I'd look at. And Corey's saying Chris Strevler's available too, though. So
okay. No, thank you.
Where's John Wolford when we need him?
I was saying, like, I would prefer Wolford over Chris Strevler.
Cardinal killer John Wolford.
Oh, and I think what's his name that just was let go from Atlanta that has been making funny TikToks? Ben DiNucci's somewhere out there.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see who they do. I mean, they're gonna. I think I have to imagine they bring someone in. So yeah.
Well, we'll see. But so this is our practice squad as of right now. I do believe that there's 2 or 3 spots left that we can make some signings. But we got wide receiver Andre Bachea. Don't know how to say that, and he's been with us for so long. Linebacker Elliott Brown, offensive lineman Jeremiah Byers, running back Michael Carter. Of course, we're going to bring back Michael Carter on the practice squad, so everybody, calm down. Offensive line Jake Curran, tight end Josiah DeGuara. I can't read.
Guara?
What was it?
I think it's DeGuara.
Guara. I should know that.
I was say, aren't you?
I speak a little Spanish. Leave me alone. Wide receiver Semi Fahoko. Defensive lineman Anthony Goodlow, cornerback Darren Hall, who everybody else was, clamoring to make the 53. He did have a pretty solid preseason, couple interceptions. So this was a very good practice squad pickup, in my opinion. Offensive lineman Sincere Hainsworth, what a name. Offensive lineman Nick Leverett. Wide receiver Tajon Palmer, and then defensive lineman Elijah Simmons, who many thought should have made the 53 as well.
Yeah, no, these are a lot of guys that were in-house. I think all of them. I'm not sure if Sincere was on the team before.
I don't believe so.
But the rest of them we've all seen. The tight end Josiah DeGuara was from the Jaguars that they just recently signed, I believe, right before preseason started. So not surprised there. And really no other surprises. We knew Carter was going to be there. I was surprised to see them cut, but I'm not going to say his name right either. Andre Bacelia.
I think I've heard it pronounced Bacelli.
Bacelli. It's all just a bunch of silent letters.
Yes.
They cut him earlier. He was one of those first couple guys that they cut. Doing just a nice little favor to kind of get his name out there before if a team grabs him. So I would not be surprised if his time is kind of short on the practice squad, that, if there is a guy that they have to move or put back down on the practice squad, that he would be the guy that might, get sent away first. Palmer, another kind of end of the roster wide receiver. A lot of people liked Elijah Simmons coming into the preseason, and liked his singing voice. So nice to see him on the practice squad again. Definitely a raw talent kind of guy. Uh, but that's all I have as far as takes. Is Darren Hall had the interception and probably should have had another interception in the Kansas City game. So good to see him end up there too.
Yeah, when I look at this practice squad, it's what you think a practice squad is going to be. It's some players who were guys that you liked and you like at the end of the roster, but you don't have room for them, so you want to keep them around, like Bocelli, who's been around for a while, DeGuara, who was I think a former third round pick of the Packers, if I'm not mistaken, Fehoko, who played well, Darren Hall, who played well, Elijah Simmons, who played well, but it's also and Michael Carter, but it's also a combination of those guys that you may see play for them this year, right? I mean, I would not be surprised at all if Michael Carter and Fehoko and Darren Hall in particular get activated on game day with the more recent rules that allow that to happen more. But there's also players that you're just kind of trying to stick around to see if you can develop for depth at positions of need, like offensive line players, like I think Byers, if I'm not mistaken, is he the one that was also a rookie? There's at least he was an undrafted free agent out of Florida State, right? So he's a guy they want to keep around. Tejuan Palmer, a guy they drafted, right? As a receiver with some speed that they wanted to see about developing. Elijah Simmons, a nose tackle who's an undrafted free agent. So those guys might not see playing time, but they're just around to try to keep developing them. So it's that nice combination of those two things. So, and again, like we talked about before, Darren Hall and Semi Fehoko and Michael Carter, those are the guys that people were upset didn't make the team. And when I looked at it, I was like, well, those are guys that are probably going to be on the practice squad, and that's probably why they didn't make the team, because they felt like they could get them back, which they did.
Yeah, and then Jake Curhan was one of the offensive linemen they signed in the offseason too, that played for Chicago. Had some position flexibility and a bunch of starts for the Bears. So interesting that he ended back up on the practice squad.
Yeah, so overall, this is just the initial 53. I'm sure there's going to be some moving around at some point. Teams are also have made their roster cuts as well, and we might look into some people that are out there. A lot of big names too. There are some wide receivers that do intrigue me, but I don't know if that's necessarily a route that we want to go, considering we're more so built towards the run and tight ends. And I'm not really keen on the way that Drew Petzing can scheme up some wide receiver looks. So we'll see if this is the initial roster we go into, and then we do have we have some IR designated to return guys, Hayden Connor, offensive lineman Christian Jones, and then like I mentioned earlier in the show, we still have guys on the PUP: Bilal Nichols, Walter Nolan, BJ Ojolari. So curious to see this next round of who gets cut to make room for these guys when they do return.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of churning, still at the bottom of the roster. That's just what happens. This initial roster is always a starting point, but there's always a certain percent of the results that are just like placeholders for guys that are going to be shuffled around that will end up on the practice squad, but they needed to keep them on the roster now, so that they could get through, wouldn't have to put them through waivers. There's just a whole lot of other little things going on, and you're going to probably see at least 2 or 3 changes to this roster, if not more, before they actually play a game.
Yep. So we'll see who we roll out week 1 against the Saints. I did want to touch on that a little bit, since we're not going to go live prior to that game. But this is going to be very interesting to see how bad the Saints are, and if we've done enough to really do what I think everybody expects us to do, which is, kick their ass. And if not, then the meltdown on Twitter is going to be absolutely epic, and I don't want to be around for it.
Oh yeah, this will definitely be throwing Cardinal fans right back into a place we've all been familiar with. A lot of down in the dumps, a lot of crazy takes if these first 2 weeks don't start off in a very convincing manner. We have the Saints who are going to bring Spencer Rattler out week 1 and, look like a team that are looking forward to Arch Manning coming out and declaring he's going to come out early, instead of looking for a Lombardi at the end of the season. And then you get the monkey on the back that has been, since at least the last decade now, and the Carolina Panthers at home, and it'll be a rough start. And I cannot imagine the Twitterverse or the Xverse if these two games start off close or not how they should go.
If they don't blow out the Saints or at least have a convincing win, yeah, I might have to kind of stay off social media for 24 hours at least, because it'll be ugly, right? And I emotionally don't know if I will be prepared to handle that. So I saw there was I forget if it was the NFL Network or somewhere, there was like this graphic of all everyone's picks for this game, and there was one person who picked the Saints, and everyone else picked the Cardinals. So yeah, I mean the Saints I think are pretty well this consensus pick to be the worst team in the league right now for very good reasons. So if the Cardinals can't have a convincing win against them, then that will be concerning. So
Yep, there's going to be some things to watch. Obviously, we have some exciting rookies to look out for with Will Johnson. I'm actually the most excited. The thing I'm most excited for is to see Darius Robinson, because started out the season last year injured, kind of came in the back half, and he was still kind of getting his feet wet a little bit. So now that he's got a full regular off season to train and kind of get going, he's going to be really excited to watch. So we got robbed of our getting to see Walter Nolan play, but we get to see Darius Robinson, and then just to see what year 2 Marv and Kyler connection looked like. I know some people wanted to see a little more of them in the preseason. We definitely should have saw them more last year's preseason, but Marv packed on a little bit of weight. We'll see if the connection is finally there. We'll see if Trey McBride finds the end zone. That plagued us a lot last year. He had a fumble recovery touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown. But yeah, it wasn't until against the Rams in week whatever it was, end of the year, that he didn't get a touchdown. So I think that's going to be an emphasis as well, is try to have Trey McBride find the end zone.
Yeah, and to expand on that, I'm not just D-Rob, but I'm excited for this first string defensive line. The home crowd, when they announced the starting defense and they announced Calais' name, it'll be very loud in State Farm Stadium. And to see him with Dalvin Tomlinson and D-Rob when the defense takes the field is where my eyes will be. I'm going to be very interested to see those guys. I'm very excited to see those guys.
I'm excited about the defense because I think that's just the side of the ball I have the most confidence in. I think their coaching staff, especially Nick Rallis, is a up and coming defensive coordinator who's going to be a head coach sooner rather than later. They coached up a defensive roster that was really lacking in real, legitimate NFL talent at key positions, and they finally got the talent. So they coached this defense to be at least competent. And now that they've got the players, I just have a lot of confidence this is going to be a good defense. I'd be shocked more than I've been shocked in a long time if this defense isn't good, right? I don't know if it'll be top 5, but it's going to be good with the coaching and the players. So I'm excited for the defense. I'm interested to see what happens with the offense because the players are there, but the talent has been there, and the question has been consistency, right? So what do we see out of Marvin Harrison Jr. in his second year, bulked up? What do we see out of Kyler Murray, right? Is there more consistency? Does the passing game overall look better? Because that in particular has been the question. So that is the thing I'm most interested to see.
Yeah, and I don't know if it came from Pensing or if it came from JG, but they did mention that they threw out a lot of the offensive playbook at the end of last season. And they sat down, went through it, and this didn't work. Take it out. This didn't work. So a lot of the preseason was them installing a new offense as well. So I think you're going to see a new look Cardinal offense, and hopefully a more consistent Cardinal offense.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And, this is going to be a make or break year for Kyler Murray. And I think if you've built up this defense, like I think they built up this defense, you can kind of get away with having a mid quarterback. And if that's really what he is through and through, is just a mid quarterback who, as long as he can game manage and maybe limit the boneheaded mistakes, which, a good defense, they can bail you out of that situation where you do throw a boneheaded interception. But if you can just kind of fix what you got going on between the ears and not kind of be reckless or try to play hero ball or get frantic in situations, I'm not too concerned about the offense. But yeah, hopefully passing game gets a lot better. But I think like I said, our identity is the run, and then our tight ends. But that's pretty much all I have as far as the roster goes. Those are my final thoughts with a little bit of what the season's going to look like and what the Saints game week 1 is going to look like.
Yeah, and I like you said, this is year 7 for Kyler, so this is kind of it. If not, I think doomsday, worst case, right? I think Monty has done a good enough job rebuilding this offense, not offense, the whole roster, that Bidwell will let him pick the next quarterback. He will get the next chance to decide who he's going to have be the quarterback of his team, and it's all on Kyler. The defense is now to the point where they're not going to ask Kyler to go out there and, hey, we need 4 touchdowns every week. This is a defense now that is going to keep these games lower scoring, and you're going to say, hey, Kyler, we need, you get us three scoring drives, a touchdown, a field goal, and the defense will keep you in every game. We're not going to see these games where they're giving up 42 points or 17 unanswered. That's not going to be Cardinal football going forward. And I'm excited. It's been a while that the team has looked this well put together, and with how the schedule breaks, getting a couple of divisions that aren't the strongest in the league, we don't have to go play, the AFC North or the AFC West. We get the AFC South. There's some good eating on the table that the Cardinals can take advantage of, and maybe we're looking at a double-digit win total, and that would be something that's exciting. And I'm optimistic.
Me too. This is listen. I've been a Kyler apologist forever, and I stand by that. And I have my reasons for that. This for me is the year, though, that if we don't see this team showing what they can be, and Kyler looking more consistent and more, looking like he's the guy who can drive the bus in this offense. If Kyler has a really up and down season again, even as a major Kyler apologist, I'm going to look at it and think they're probably going to be looking for their next plan. I believe in the talent. I believe in what he can do. I believe in his work ethic, despite what some people might think. And I think he's going to pull it off and be good. But if he doesn't, if it is another season where, at the end of the season, he falls off a cliff and his play is a couple great games, but a lot of games that aren't great, I'm going to start to change my opinion at that point. But I think he's going to do it.
Well, here's to hoping that Kyler Murray in year seven puts it all together.
Oh
But I
man.
think that concludes it for the first inaugural episode of the Bird and Gold podcast. I want to thank everybody that was in the comments. I know we didn't get to a lot of comments. Lorenzo, I did see your comment about asking me to pronounce your last name, so I'm going to give it a shot before we head out. Tewahafa Tewa. If I get that wrong,
I'm going to try. I'm going to take a shot. It's Tewahaftawa. Tewahaftawa.
That's
my
Off
guess.
the tongue.
Tewahaftawa, and I'm probably not right.
I will pass.
Oh, come on,
and I
chicken.
thought my last name was a nightmare. But yes, thank you all for being in the chat. Thank you, Joe, for allowing us to use your platform. So yeah, hopefully you guys tune in with us every week. It'll be a lot of this, just going back and forth, because this is what me and Colby do anyways. We go down to our local dive. We have a plate of chicken wings and we talk sports. So we thought, might as well put a couple microphones in between us. But thank you all. You can find me on Twitter at jsandiego, that is with 2 O's.
And you can find me on Twitter at BrownC74, as well as our Twitter page for the podcast at Bird and Goal.
And you all can find me here and on Twitter at Jokomo13, JOKOMO13. And so thank you, Jack and Colby, for letting me be your guest on your first episode. I'll probably be on here once in a while, but this is Jackie and Colby's show. So I won't be here every week, but I am looking at maybe doing a TCR thing. So we'll see about that. But thank you for having me, and look forward to be on here at some point again with you all.
Yep, we will love to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.